Well, I'm excited. Hi, I'm Dean Charolta Tokac. I'm the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences. I'm by training a Roman and Byzantine historian. And if you think about the environment, this already happened in antiquity as well. Actually, Plato writes about how Attica was devoid of trees and how they just had, like, when it rained, water was just gushing down and everything, the topsoil was taken away. So it's something that has been with us for a long, long time. But, okay, I want to welcome you to World on Fire, a lecture series that examines important topics facing humanity through a variety of academic lenses. The series aims to provide our community with a platform to engage in important and timely discussions about global challenges. Allow me to quote Rachel Carson, the author of Silent Spring, which was published in 1962. Some of us haven't even been born then, whose work led to the modern environmental movement and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. She said, "In nature, nothing exists alone. In nature, nothing exists alone. We all are, from the humblest microbe to us humans, but integral parts and participants of complex systems and networks. We exist in interconnectedness with one another and the earth we inhabit." And I lost my place. This was really emphatic, right? Because of this, we are urged to act with an awareness that our actions, both individually and collectively, have far-reaching consequences, and that our own survival and prosperity are fundamentally dependent on the health and harmony, by which I mean the dynamic and yet the balance of life on this, our planet. It is my immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Melissa Aronczyk, a distinguished scholar and leading authority in the field of media studies. Dr. Aronczyk holds a PhD from the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication at the New York University. She is a professor in the School of Communications and Information at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, where her work focuses on the intersection of media, public relations, and social issues. Since 2023, Dr. Aronczyk is the director also of the PhD program in Communication, Information, and Media, so 3 components at the Rutgers School of Communication and Information, which is lovely called SKY. Dr. Aronczyk's groundbreaking research has shed light on how public relations strategies shape and influence our discourse around critical topics, particularly climate change and environmentalism. She's the author of Blowing Up the Brand, Critical Perspectives on Promotional Culture as well, and some other books from Oxford University. And she also has edited a book which most recently received a prize, and it's called A Strategic Nature, Public Relations and the Politics of Environmentalism. This seminal work was recognized in 2023 with the Roderick P. Hart Outstanding Book Award in Political Communication from the National Communication Association, a testament to its profound impact and relevance. Dr. Aronczyk's expertise is highly sought after, and her insights on PR's role in environmental communication have been featured in prominent media outlets, and let me just mention some: the BBC, the Financial Times, Rolling Stone, CNBC, etc., etc. Dr. Aronczyk has also contributed her expertise to publications like the Washington Post and Foreign Policy magazine, where she has written compellingly about the relationship between public relations and sustainability. Well, awesome, no? Right? Please join me extending a warm CSI dolphin welcome to Dr. Melissa Aronczyk, who will speak to us on climate of publicity. Welcome, Dr. Aronczyk. Thank you so much. You're welcome. This is your talk.
Hi, everyone. It's really, really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Dean Pakach and I want to thank Donna for helping to make this possible and for this World on Fire lecture series, which seems like a very important contribution to thinking about some of the most urgent issues of our time, like climate change. I also want to recognize my friend from graduate school, Dr. Bilge Yessel, who teaches here at CSI and who so kindly thought of me for speaking to me. So I'm really, really excited to talk about this topic. So, as I was saying, I worked in an ad agency. We learned a lot about persuasive communication. How do you persuade or influence people to think about something, especially to think about something in the way you want them to think about it? When I was at this ad agency, we developed brands for our clients. And we spent a lot of time creating profiles, like what is the profile or personality of the brand? What kind of person would use this brand? What values would this person have? And how can we shape the brand to align with those values so that people make positive associations between themselves and the brand? That is basically advertising in a nutshell. You create a message for a product or a service by developing associations in people's minds between what they care about and what the brand represents. So, to take a simple example to start, I can basically assume everybody here knows what this is. Okay. Now, what you do is, if you're trying to do persuasive communication in the ad and marketing and branding world, you take this, make sure it stays up. You take that and you put it here. Okay. So this little black check mark comes to mean sports, athleticism, champion, right? Okay, very straightforward. But the thing I used to love about working in the ad business is that it was really a kind of magic. Because you're starting with a symbol that's essentially meaningless, right? And maybe by distorting the swoosh, you can sort of get a sense of what I mean. There is nothing inherently inside the shape of the swoosh, meaningless. The shape itself doesn't carry any meaning. We do. Whatever meaning you want people to create from a brand, you have to create it for them and repeat it a lot, everywhere, as often as possible. Okay, so I think we all get the point here. That was like the most basic, branding 101 I could give you. Okay, moving right on. For the last 10 years or so, I've been thinking about brands and advertising and public relations and other kinds of persuasive communication in the context of climate change. And one thing that's become really clear to me about climate change is that it has a massive branding problem. What words or images do we associate with climate change? If climate change were a brand, what would that brand be? So I actually want to hear from you. What do you picture in your mind? Like the very first thing, mental image, when I say melting? Okay, melting, like literally what picture? Like do you picture ice? You picture a polar bear? Ice. Okay, ice melting. Anyone else? What do you picture? Fire. Okay, okay, yeah, what else? Diesel, like you picture a car. Diesel gas, like smoking up in the sky, coming off of those, when you're coming off the I-95, there's all those stacks with the stuff coming out of them. Okay, yeah, that's about it. Well, if we ask Google, we're going to get a pretty similar kind of answer. I asked Google. I Googled climate change. Those are the images. That's pretty much what you guys just said to me, right? Now, what values are suggested by these images? What do diesel and melting and fire have to do with our values? I think about, when I look at this, fear, right? Anxiety, depression, right? World on fire. So if I were the ad agency working to brand climate change, I'd be freaking out right now. I'd be pretty worried, right? I'd have a really big job ahead of me. This is not a good starting place to think about climate change. Then I thought to myself, I was like, all right, maybe this is a little unfair. Okay, let's ask AI. Let's ask ChatGPT, right? So I did. I asked ChatGPT. I don't have the paid version, but good enough, right? Make a picture of climate change. It took a long time. I was kind of surprised. It's not so good at images, right? What do you think I'm going to show you next? What do you think the image is going to look like that ChatGPT made for me? City on fire? Yeah, okay, not far off. Almost worse than what the Google images had, right? Okay, so, you know, the worst part is that in the time it took OpenAI to build that image for me, it probably emitted carbon into the atmosphere. Here's the thing. Climate change is very hard to picture. And when things are hard to imagine, they're hard to think about. You probably know already that climate change is not just a problem for science to figure out. It affects everything. We could talk about food and agriculture, how hotter temperatures affect crops and pastures for animals to graze. We could talk about housing, real estate, insurance. All these dots you see here are cities that are at increasing risk for flooding, which is going to massively affect the real estate market, the value of your home, and the ability to get insurance to protect your home. We could talk about climate change in terms of labor and unemployment, because it's really hard to work when it's too hot. So climate change is not really a problem or a brand the way we typically think of problems or brands. Instead, I really like this idea from the geographer Mike Hulme, who says, we must now recognize climate change as an overlying, fluid, and imaginative condition of human existence. And I like this because that means we are already living in climate change. We are a climate change generation. And that means that it's in existence, and we all have to find ways to live with this new reality. Reality. That is the next branding problem we face. Because some groups are taking steps to claim that climate change isn't a problem. Now, you probably can't see too well here. These are kind of small images, so I'll just give you a little bit of an overview here. So what you see in the top left there, the small red compared to the big blue circle, the red are influencers in the community of climate change deniers, people who say climate change is a hoax, or it isn't real, or we still have ice, so therefore the temperature is getting cooler, the global warming is not happening, et cetera. So you can see there's a much bigger circle of believers in climate change who are influential in what is now our digital public sphere. If you look over here now, this is basically down here is like the bigger versions of what you see up there. So down here is the network of the top influencers, and just to give you a few names, you see here Fox News, Washington Examiner, a few names of individuals who are really active in social media, and over on this side you have really active on social media people, influencers who do believe in climate change. You have ABC News, the Washington Post, CNN, Bernie Sanders. Okay, so you get the point here. Now, this isn't a new thing, actually. This is the digital version. But since the 1980s, when climate change first captured the attention of the general public, fossil fuel companies, among others, have taken steps to sow doubt about the realities of climate change. Now, to explain this slide, that logo in the top left, the Information Council for the Environment, was run by a small group of scientists and related groups in the early 1990s who didn't believe climate change was real. And they worked very hard with different groups, including the Edison Electric Institute, which was an industry trade group, to develop a series of advertising campaigns to deny global warming. And there was a list of strategies they used to guide them. And you can see these strategies here in the red outline. So the strategies, number one, the advertising goal, reposition global warming as theory, not fact. Number two, target print and radio media for maximum effectiveness. So this is the 90s, those were the major media, right? No internet, certainly not the kind of widespread internet we have now. And three, achieve broad participation across the entire electric utility industry. And the reason they were really interested in that industry is that a lot of fossil fuel companies were already really on board with this campaign, and they were trying to get the electric utilities to join them. A lot of electricity, especially then, used fossil fuels to generate electricity. So they were trying to bring them into the fold for this campaign. Now, at the same time as you had these industry groups working against climate knowledge, our news outlets were contributing to the confusion. So just to come back to this slide here by Dimitrios Gunnaridis and Josh Newell, this is from their study, The Social Anatomy of Climate Change Denial in the United States, that just came out last year. What you may or may not see here, because it's a bit fuzzy, is both individuals and news outlets, and that has to do with how our digital media space works, right? We have influencers. Didn't quite work that way in the 80s and 90s, so it was really the news outlets that were mainly the sources of communication. So what I'm trying to say is there was a media problem in addition to a political problem. In the 1980s and 90s, some of the confusion about climate change as fact had to do with news reporters' tendency to report on both sides of a debate. And even though the scientific facts were not in debate, journalists wrote stories that provided perspectives both from people who believed in climate change and from fossil fuel companies or related groups who didn't feel the same way, because that's what journalists do. They collect different perspectives on a story. So currently, our media platforms reflect and reinforce those polarized positions. And the more polarized we are as a society, the more polarized our news outlets also become. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. My point here is that these information ecosystems, the media and communication that we currently have not helped us imagine together the problem of climate change, or come up with a way for all of us together to imagine a collective response. Okay, that was part two. Part three, beyond the politics and beyond the platforms that are hosting fights over the reality of climate change, we have a whole other kind of branding problem, which is that a lot of companies want to brand themselves right now as being at the forefront of a solution to climate change, but they're going about it in a slightly strange way. Next week is Climate Week in New York City. Does anybody know what Climate Week is? Anyone have any connection to Climate Week? There's a ton of events all over New York City. I really encourage you to find out about them, and there's all kinds of free stuff. There'll be fun things and serious things, all kinds of stuff. So if you haven't yet checked it out, I hope you will. Climate Week is an annual event. It's in partnership with the United Nations General Assembly, which is also taking place in New York. So this is like my PSA now is do not drive into New York. It's going to be total gridlock. Take the train. Now, this Climate Week, as I said, is every year in New York City, but also it takes place in other cities. There's one in Montreal, Canada. There's one in Los Angeles, one in London, one in Rio, and so on. Lots of major cities host Climate Weeks. And the idea is to bring together business leaders, political figures, local groups, put them in rooms together, and get them to talk about climate change. So, sounds good. It's a little like the Oscars of climate change, but without the nice outfits or the awards. But otherwise, it's just like the Oscars.
Okay, a lot of companies want to be in the room and want to sponsor Climate Week because it's good for their brand to be associated with positive action around climate change. This is just some of the sponsors, by the way, and probably not all of them are familiar to you. That's okay. I'm going to show you more in a minute, just to give you a quick tour. Some of these, you recognize some, I'm sure. Some of them are construction firms, some of them are engineering firms, banks, right? So you have all kinds of different stakeholders, different groups who are interested in being in the room and especially in getting attention in the media for positive action on climate change. And that's how branding works. When there are major events, and in this case, a major event about climate change, especially major events with a lot of media attention and a lot of opportunities to put your brand in front of a lot of people so they can make positive associations, like we saw in part 1 of my talk, brands want to be part of these conversations. Because no matter what's happening on the American political scene or in the White House, brands know that a lot of people do care about climate change and do hold values that have to do with engaging with brands that promote sustainability. At the same time, some of these brands have their own branding problems, and that's why they want to be part of the climate change conversation. Let's take Microsoft as an example. Microsoft, very successful, very large, multinational computer software company. Lately, like a lot of technology companies, Microsoft has gotten into the artificial intelligence business. So it has Microsoft Copilot, which integrates AI into your Word and Outlook and stuff like that. It has Microsoft Edge, which is a browser, AI-supported browser. Microsoft's MSN now has AI integration and so on, okay? But here's the thing. By adding so much AI to their business, Microsoft is falling off the cliff when it comes to sustainability. Bad for the brand, what you see here, right? This is bad. Technology and AI companies need a vast amount of energy to power their products and data centers, and a vast amount of water to cool their data servers. This makes it very hard for them to control their greenhouse gas emissions. So maybe Microsoft wants to be at Climate Week to learn some new ideas for dealing with their own contributions to climate-related problems. But I can tell you that one major reason they definitely want to be at Climate Week is to make sure it looks like they're doing something about climate change. Microsoft wants to make sure we are still associating their brand with climate action and sustainability in our minds, right? They want us to be thinking Microsoft and sustainability, not Microsoft and climate disaster, right? This is the branding problem. Another big group of companies who are very active sponsoring Climate Week are consulting firms. So you have here McKinsey, BCG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Roland Berger, and KPMG. Okay. Again, you might not have heard of these firms. Consulting firms have a tendency to be a little bit under the radar because they work with the big brands that you will have heard of, but they're less well known in the public eye. Consulting firms are basically companies that other companies or governments hire when they need extra help for a huge project, or when they need special expertise for something that they might not be able to do in-house. That's essentially what consulting firms do. They work with major clients all over the world to help them manage their business. And climate consulting is a huge business. The global climate consulting market is projected to reach over $10 billion within the next 6 or 7 years. Huge growth market. Everyone, every brand needs to deal with the reality of climate change. And they themselves might not have the expertise which is why they turn to the consulting firms. But let's look at one really big branding problem that these consulting firms have, which is that they sometimes work at cross purposes. Let's take McKinsey to show you what I mean. McKinsey is one of the largest and oldest consulting firms in the business. It's been around 100 years, very well established. Now, McKinsey has a sustainability wing of its firm, and it's really important for McKinsey to brand itself as being part of the climate transition, both for its own carbon footprint, which actually isn't that big because they mostly do this kind of knowledge work, but also for the clients that they're working for who do have the potential to have massive carbon footprints. Like I said, a lot of brands want to be part of the climate conversation. But research by, among others, New York Times journalists, investigative journalists, Michael Forsyth and Walt Bogdanich, discovered that McKinsey has also advised nearly half of the 100 most polluting companies in the world. And as the article says, across the world, from China to the United States, McKinsey's work with these companies, these polluting companies, is often not focused on reducing their environmental impact, but rather on cutting costs, boosting productivity, and increasing profits. That's what I mean by cross purposes. They're at Climate Week, they have climate-focused clients, but they're also working with companies that are not interested in actually reducing their carbon footprint, like major oil and gas companies. So, why would McKinsey want to be at Climate Week? Well, the first and most obvious answer is to find more clients. Okay, that goes without saying, that's good business, right? But the second reason, once again, is that they want to look like they are doing the right thing when it comes to climate change. It's a branding problem. One more group of sponsors that I want to talk about. Can anyone guess what is common to these 5 companies? What sector are these 5 companies part of? Electricity. Thank you. Excellent. These are electric utilities, electrical engineering, and electric company business groups. And right now, as I said a moment ago, the primary source of energy for a lot of electric companies, not all, but a lot of them, comes from fossil fuels. And research in the last few years has uncovered how electric utilities were part of campaigns to hide the dangers of fossil fuels so they could keep their business going. Highly recommend. Okay, I have a bonus question. This is like, those of you who are here for credit, you can get extra credit. I will give $5 to anyone who correctly answers this question, or who answers it first, if there's more than one of you. Okay, are you ready? I'll show you the slide again. Did anyone notice anything about one of the companies on this slide? Something that has to do with something I said earlier in my presentation. Oh, I'm going to keep my $5. Anyone? I'll give you a couple more minutes. Anything? Yeah?
Throw it out there. They're trying to show that they're kind of connected with climate change and environmentally friendly. The Edison, I don't know, so you can guess your the sun and the green.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, that is not, you do not get $5 for that. But you did raise a really interesting point, which is that the actual visual design, right, the graphic design of a lot of utilities, oil companies, gas companies today is to look very climate friendly. The famous example you've probably heard of is BP, right? British Petroleum, which now has rebranded as Beyond Petroleum, and it has this really nice sun logo. If you look back, if you Google BP from back in the day, they had a completely different logo, and they're still an oil company, right? Okay, they haven't actually changed what they do, they've just changed their brand. But so thank you, but no. Okay, I'm going to show you, I'm going to keep my $5, but I'm going to show you, oh, yeah?
Wasn't that EEI was paying for the opposite message 30 years ago?
I owe you $5. You can come up and see me, after for $5. 40 years ago, Edison Electric Institute was working with the Information Council for the Environment on climate denial. This is an at least 40-year campaign by those who do not want us to imagine the reality of climate change. And they're going to be at Climate Week next week. And now that I'm giving this talk, they probably will not want to see me when I show up. That's okay. Here's my point. And congratulations. Over the next several days, you are going to see a lot of media coverage of Climate Week. It's going to be everywhere in the local news and probably in the national news as well, and the international news because of the United Nations General Assembly, which is participating to some degree in Climate Week. If we let these companies, all the logos I've shown you and many more, if we let these companies do the imagining for us, we are going to get a picture in our minds of climate change that may not be the picture we need that will help us connect together and work to respond to climate change. Companies like these want to create associations in our minds. That's what they do. That is what they're very, very good at. Those of you who study corporate communication, you know this, right? Another thing that these companies want to do is make it look like they have the answers, that we can trust them, that we can rely on them to solve problems. And climate change is a very big problem. But for 40 years, some, not all, some companies have tried really hard to not allow us to imagine solutions, pathways forward. And so maybe it's time for other people to start doing the imagining. And that's, I think, where we come in. I keep saying imagine and pointing to my head, as, just to make a point. But I'm actually not really talking about the psychological when I say imagine. I'm really talking about the social. I'm talking about a collective imagining that we all do together. Because this is the problem of our era. It's a problem that faces all of us. It does not affect all of us equally, that's for sure. But it's something that all of us should have a say in. It's something that all of us need to deal with. So what I'm asking you, the challenge I'm presenting here is, can we imagine together? Can all of us create a collective imagination that lets us come together and work out pathways forward to deal with this reality? I'm going to leave you with a comment from the French scholar Bruno Latour. I'm a very big fan of his work, French writer and thinker. And he said, to have common facts, you need a common reality. And I think that's where we are now. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear from you with questions. I want everyone to go home and use ChatGPT, but only for a minute because it really drains the energy. And ask it some good questions and push it to think a little bit harder about climate change.
More of just an observation. Right from the get-go, we have a sort of competing narratives, right, of global warming and climate change. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I thought about that actually when I did this first slide here. I'll go all the way back. Sorry. When I first did this, I thought, oh, will it look different if I do global warming versus climate change? And it really wasn't, to my surprise. It really wasn't. So these days, we are using them more as synonyms, even though they have different histories, different origins. Climate change is a more recent term. And it's actually a very political term that was developed by a Republican strategist, actually a communications strategist, to try to mitigate the sense that something bad was happening. It was actually a kind of euphemism that was created. So in a sense, let's say, I personally will use them more or less interchangeably, but I think about it in terms of what era I'm writing about. So if I'm writing about the 1980s or 90s, I'll say global warming, because that's the term people were using in that time. And similarly, if you're doing research and you're doing a word search, You would search more for global warming, of course, because people weren't saying climate change in that time. But I think at this point, to me, that word use is less of a central factor in the imagining, because to me, both have become so popularly used. You will have a lot of, to give maybe a parallel example, a lot of oil and gas and electric utility companies are now calling themselves energy companies, right? They've kind of moved away from calling them, saying I'm an oil company or a petroleum company. So if you Google the name of a firm, any kind of company, especially some of those that were less familiar, it'll say an energy company. And so that's not quite clear what that is, and you have to kind of dig a little deeper to figure out, okay, no, but what's their business actually in, right? How are they actually making their money? So I don't actually think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually good. It kind of serves this collective imagining. If all of these companies want to be thought of as energy companies, great, let's have as many as we can in an energy space. But then that means if we're all in the business together of thinking about where energy sources come from, let's work together to do that. So I don't know, I kind of see it as maybe almost an opportunity to all of us use the word climate change or energy. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes?
While we're on communication, do you find that one of the problems for the ordinary public is the difference between climate and weather?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we as a society, I think, are very connected to and very interested in weather, right? We all have weather apps on our phones. I don't know about you, but anytime we're planning to do anything now, my partner has to look at the weather app before they do any, literally you don't leave the house before you've checked your weather, right? It's very much front and center in our minds. There has been a pattern of trying to bring meteorologists and other weather announcers into climate change advocacy and get them to be the ones to make that connection, and that has had mixed results. I think it has been successful in some contexts. It has been less successful in others, where sometimes people were being attacked, to put it frankly, or harassed for making those connections, and so it's a very politicized space. I still think, again, sort of similar to Donna's question, I think there's an opportunity there. I think there's potential in connecting climate to weather, but it's not a one-to-one correspondence, as we know, right? It's not just a matter of the weather being hotter. That is one of the outcomes of climate change. I'm not going to rehearse all the science, so I don't want to, it's not a science presentation. But I do think that because of our affinity to and need to think about weather, there's a real opportunity to use it as a platform for talking about climate. Yes, of course.
You mentioned earlier kind of how climate change does impact different people differently.
Yes.
And especially there's kind of an issue recently with data centers impacting more rural communities.
Right.
Like air pollution as well as energy pollution.
Absolutely.
So how do you think we can frame the conversation, because obviously we're covering AI and like technology and all these advancements, how do you balance that alongside having like people care and value about these real human lives that are currently being impacted by climate change in the present moment?
Right. That's a really interesting way to put it. These groups, so in case it wasn't, just to repeat into the mic what you said, the question is, some of these data centers are being put in places where communities are already vulnerable. And when you put a data center or server in a place where, let's say, there isn't enough water or it's already really hot, right, for instance, you are not helping the case for these vulnerable communities that are already struggling. So the suggestion would be, how can we bring attention to this plight? Before even the data center went there, that would have been a valid question, right? How do we bring attention to the fact that people are living in communities where water is more scarce, and how do we already help these communities? There's already been, for many decades now, over 100 years, fights over water supply between cities and more rural areas, between cities and remote areas. In this case, I hear opportunity. If I were a strategic communicator here, I would hear an opportunity. And the opportunity is, I think even though AI is very rapidly becoming an everyday part of our lives, there is still a tremendous amount of skepticism, shall we say, or maybe concern over what AI is doing to us as humanity. And there's a way that then, I think, to use that as a vehicle for talking about the climate implications of putting these data centers and server centers in these locations. Maybe in a way, it's an opportunity to target those specific areas and then look also at how they're networked globally and see what the implications are there. These are good questions. Yes?
If you go back to the slide that shows like the climate denier influencers versus the climate
Yeah, oops, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah.
influencers for change.
Oops, here we go.
Is there like another graphic or figure that shows that earlier or later, like if they've changed or grown or anything like that?
That's a great question. Yes, there is some fantastic research out there that has looked at the evolution of contrarian discourse over time. Some of it deals with the strategic communication dimensions. So for instance, they'll say, okay, here's a typology. Here's 4 different kinds of anti-climate change discourse. And some of them will do what you're asking about here, which is say, who's in this public space? Who are the key influencers? The Pew Research Center actually has some really great data on this kind of thing. And Pew is a really great source because they do look over time at problems. They come back to the same problems at a distance of a few years, so you can see the change. I've seen some of this stuff in Pew. And you will see, especially when they focus on media organizations, the proliferation of more and more extreme points of view that pull, like, the size of the circles has to do with the level of influence, right, as you see from that chart up there. So the bigger the circle, the more influential they are. So, Fox News, which is this big red, the biggest red circle you can see there, which is over to the right, they are a major player, and they have been so for some time. Other players are new in the space. So, I think I'm assuming you're asking something like this, but you tell me. It's really interesting to see the proliferation of both circles. Just, in other words, the question is really one of the proportion, not of the actual size. Is there like a second question there? Were you thinking about something when you asked that?
No, I was just kind of curious, like seeing it. I can't really see it.
Yeah, you have to come a bit closer to, yeah. Yeah.
But, I also have another question.
Go for it. Oh, and just before you ask it, I'll just say this report is online, and at the University of Michigan site, they have some of these images too. So I really encourage you to go see. There's other images that Gunnaridis and Newell produce in just this article alone. So take a look also. But yes, sorry, go ahead to your second question.
For like the rebranding of climate change, would it make more sense to like focus on what we could do than what is happening? Is that like kind of something that you're leaning towards, or that you're like
yes.
pushing for?
Yeah, there's actually some really good research on that too. In fact, my colleague at Rutgers, Lauren Feldman, and her collaborators have done research on exactly that question, where they say, if you frame climate change in the doomsday apocalypse kind of scenario, does that wake people up more, or does it make them more despondent and less willing to act, right? Versus if you have a positive messaging, or if you produce a problem, you talk about the problem of climate change, but then you offer a solution inside the same article. Does that have an effect? And the answer is yes. Yes, it has a more positive effect overall on people's sense that they can do something. So yes, again, I think you're really onto something. A few years ago, some major newspapers, I'm thinking of The Guardian in the UK, and I think it was the New York Times also, decided to refer to climate change as the climate emergency. Because the idea was, right, if we talk about it as an emergency, that will make it seem more urgent to people and more people will act. But not everybody liked that approach. That almost created more problems than it solved in a way. And one problem is, climate change is not going away. So calling it an emergency, mobilize everyone to act, but then, people's attention is limited. We are pulled in 1,000 directions all the time. That's why I really like Mike Hulme's idea, this one, thinking about climate change as a condition of our existence rather than as an emergency, because it's something that is here and not going away. It's something that we have to adapt to, it's something we have to mitigate, it's something we have to be alongside and be inside. So I like thinking about it this way more than I like thinking about it in a kind of emergency way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Building on what you were saying, since people have that, because there could be a lot of believers in like climate change, but in those, like in that group of people, there's also people who believe in it but won't do anything about it. Do you think like because of that mindset, it's gonna get worse from now on, like
Yeah.
the generation?
That's a really good question. And I mentioned the psychological and the social, and I should have also maybe mentioned the individual and the group. One thing that companies have done in an attempt to kind of take the heat off of them for dealing with climate change is to say, you should recycle more, right? You should consume less. You should buy less plastic. You should, you the individual, And of course, that's all true. That's true. Sure. Great. Yes. I try really hard not to buy plastic water bottles. My kid can't take it anymore. I have refused to allow him to buy what I call plastic garbage at the bodega, so he's not allowed. He has to buy a can. He can't buy it anyway. He's really tired of me saying that. That said, if it's used as a deflection, right? In other words, if a company says, you should recycle, so I'll just keep making plastic bottles the way I've always been making plastic bottles, and you should just recycle them, that to me is a problem. It's a problem for a few reasons. One is that what you will do at an individual scale could never have the impact that these companies would have by changing their production process, right? By thinking smarter about how to produce, how to innovate, how to come up with a new degradable material that could put water, Gatorade, or whatever else. But the second thing is that recycling has been also shown to be kind of a little bit of a scam. A lot of the stuff we put in the recycling bins cannot be recycled. So recycling was actually a very interesting deflect by companies trying to, again, push the problem off of what they were doing by making it seem like something we needed to do. So while, yes, I think there is a role for all of us, and as you said, there are people who believe in climate change but don't do anything, but some of us have a lot of other really important preoccupations, and I don't think we should be made to feel bad for having those preoccupations, right? If you have to get to school, you have work, you have stuff to do, you have a family, you have a million things to take care of. Yes, sure, we can all be in a climate reality and think about it, but I don't think we should be made to feel guilty or wrong for trying to live our lives and be happy. Where the real difference can come is with petroleum companies, natural gas companies, coal companies, the automotive sector, airplane manufacturers, right, airlines. They are the ones whose change will really make a difference. So maybe what we can do is hold them to account more. What we can do is say, this is not okay. This behavior is not okay. These products are not okay. That's where I think as individuals we can come together and make a bigger difference. Does that help? Yeah. Yes, go here, and then I'll go here, and I'll go back to Bill Gay. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, please. Yeah.
Following up to that, how can everyone in this room try to hold those companies accountable for what they're doing? And is that even possible on an individual level?
Right. So there's some really interesting campaigns, actually. If you go to Climate Week next week, you'll see some of them in action. There's a lot of creative groups that have come together to say, join us and while we fight back against these companies. Because yes, it is very hard to do alone. I mean, yes, you can go on social media and send them stuff, and you've all seen stuff where people do that, and it has a bit of an effect. It kind of brings visibility to something egregious that a company or a brand is doing. But I think maybe it's more effective and certainly more fun to get together with some of these creative groups. I can give you a list afterwards. I have a whole bunch of groups that are saying, let's do a big visibility campaign. Let's do our own advertising campaign that says we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to buy that anymore. Boycotts are another sort of related tactic that some people do. There's been some really interesting interruptions. You've seen some of this stuff where people go to the museum and people go to visible places, they go to big media events, and they make a scene to get attention. All of those things, I think, do have an impact. I think they do remind us that we're not alone when we feel like something needs to happen, but that it's too big for us to do alone. So yeah, highly recommend that stuff. Yes?
So would the realistic goal be to raise awareness or to actually have change?
Well, obviously, the change is the thing, but the awareness leads to the change, or at least we hope it does. I wonder myself, I had those slides about food and about employment and stuff like that. We aren't yet, I think, doing a good enough job of connecting those dots for people and just reminding people that, it's not okay to be in a really hot temperature without enough water for a long period of time, and that's related to climate change, that there is a connection to be made there about protections, and that those protections require the employer to do something about it, and that employer doing something about it can make a change. You see what I mean? Just drawing those dots can not just build the awareness, but then push people forward. I'll leave it there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, really cool.
What a wonderful ending with this optimism. And act locally. At CSI, we have the Sustainability Club, all right? And we're a green campus, so we're really proud of that. Get involved, okay? That's how we make incremental change. Thank you so very much, Dr. Ramjic,
Thanks for coming
to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really wonderful. Thanks again.